friends and enemies. Welcome back, Canadian Bitcoiners podcast, where StreamYard is still giving me trouble when I go live. My name is Joey. You know that already. I'm taking a day off work today to talk to my friend Scott Wolfe. Scott is involved in a couple of things here. I was going to pull up the website, but we'll talk about it. The Bitcoin Coalition of Canada, and he's also involved in some Bitcoin circular economy stuff. Both things that are pretty important, and both things that I think I've been critical of in the past. But having talked to Scott and met him last year at the conference, I've come around to, I think, what's closer to the standard sort of mainstream way of thinking on these things, that there is value in encouraging Bitcoin circular economies in your community, which is an easy place to start, I think, for a lot of people. We've seen, obviously, stuff like the Sats market take off in Alberta, among other places. And then on top of that, engaging with governments. I mean, there's clearly, if you look at the American model here in the last year or so, there's clearly value in engaging with politicians who are willing to talk with you on even ground, on equal footing, and do so in good faith. So we're going to talk about all those things today, the Canadian angle, obviously, where Scott's doing his work, among other things. But first and foremost, as you guys know, we are sponsored by two great companies. EasyDNS is the first. Mark and team, the best place for you to start a website. You can do a number of things over there, okay? Mark is a friendly neighborhood registrar, as he likes to go by, or maybe the friendly neighborhood registrar. There can't be many of those. You can either buy a website there, URL, or port one. We've done both. It's been great both times. You can set up your website. It takes literally minutes. Mark helped us with ours. He will help you with yours too. And although we don't use it as often as we should, we're thinking about getting on this a little more here and there, maybe another short video every week on something to do with economics. We'll see. Inspired by Rich Diaz. Mark will help us with that, and we'll post that there. And then obviously, if you're a Bitcoin enthusiast, I mean, where else are you going to get the virtual private server suite of stuff, of tools that Mark has? You can do Bitcoin nodes, Nostr relays. You can do BTC Pay servers. You can do node lists. I say those 4 every week. There's probably a bunch more that I don't know, because I'm not the virtual private server guy you want to be talking to. I don't even run a node, as has become popular lore on this program. But Mark will help you with all that stuff. And then, of course, DomainSure, which is a great security suite, a set of products and services that will help you make sure that your website stays secure. You guys see these stories every week about fake scam emails trying to fish for your information. I just saw the other day that Rick from Crypto Cloaks got a fake email from quote unquote Twitter, X, whatever, telling him that he violated some terms of service clause and needed to email this person, click on this link. Don't do it. Mark will make sure that this doesn't happen to your website. I don't know what Twitter's doing, but this happens to them all the time. Coinbase has been nicked by these guys a couple times over the years too. You don't have to worry about that if you go with Mark. Use our promo code CBP Media. You get half off your first round of buys, and you get your money back if you don't like the service, which is pretty rare these days too. But it'll never happen because Mark is best in silo, as you know. Other companies, best in silo, Bull Bitcoin. Man, I got some news that I can't share, but these guys are as good as it gets, okay? Like, you look at Bull Bitcoin, and you got a team there of extremists in both official languages, outstanding. It's the best place to buy Bitcoin, non-custodial. Never worry about getting rugged. Never worry about someone freezing your Bull Bitcoin account. Nothing there. What are they going to freeze? You might not even have set your accurate personal information there. Who knows? I'm not saying you did or didn't, but you can't get frozen. You love that. You can live on a Bitcoin standard with Bull if you use their bills platform. You're talking not just buying gift cards for stuff, which is good. That's a good start. There's a lot of people that do that, but I'm talking pay your mortgage, your cell phone bill, probably not your bar tab, but soon enough, maybe if your bar gets on a Bitcoin standard and wants to add themselves to that list, you could probably do it there. And then, of course, the privacy features baked in. If you use Bull Bitcoin for a buy, there's CoinJoin and whatnot baked in on the way out on those transactions. You can't beat that. I hear people complaining that the Bull Bitcoin minimum buy is too high, $200. When you look at all the stuff you get for that $200, it's really not high at all. And I would argue that many of you are spending more than $200. I mean, I don't have to argue. I can see on my Bull Bitcoin dashboard for the podcast that a lot of you guys, I don't know who is doing the buys, but I know a lot of you guys are fucking buying a lot more than 200 at a time. So I don't think it's a problem for people who listen to and watch this show. So go there. If you haven't signed up yet, sign up. I mean, you probably have, but if you want to sign somebody else up, don't use your promo code, use ours and give us like $10 or $20 or whatever. Yeah, and I see Benny in the chat. Just buy liquid Bitcoin and don't tell Len. There's many options on Bull. They have that too, obviously. But yeah, best sponsor in the land there. links and all that stuff in the description. Here's Scott. Scott, I didn't mention this in the intro, but you also are less than enthusiastic about the career arc of Russell Westbrook, which I find offensive. And maybe we could talk about that too. But, first and foremost, what's going on? How the heck are you?
I'm all right, brother. How you doing? I'm honored that you took a day off of work to hang with me. That's what
I'm
I'm
happy to
looking
do it,
forward
man.
to that.
I'm happy to do it. I've done it before, and no hard feelings. We were telling people on the show on Monday you were going to come to the studio, but
I know.
because of the snow, we had Ali and Brad last Thursday booked for here. They couldn't make it. Way too long a drive from London. And now you guys in Toronto, we just talked about this on the show on Monday night. It's a nightmare with the snow, and so you guys are paying the highest property taxes on the planet and can't get dug out for weeks. You're stuck in your house looking at each other in the mirror, right? You and your wife and your kids, whatever. So, it's all good. I do appreciate you coming on. Maybe the best place to start, since you will be unfamiliar to some of the viewers and listeners, who are you? I mean, you're on Twitter, obviously. You've been in the Bitcoin space a while, but I think a lot of people, you're operating in a way that not many people do, which is to say, I can go on your feed and not get bombarded with like dumb Pepe memes, but rather quality content that requires more than 7 seconds of attention. Some of the Bitcoin people don't love that, but this would be a good time for you to explain to them maybe why they should and who you are.
Yeah, sure. So, Scott, based in Toronto, playing a couple of roles in the sort of global Bitcoin ecosystem. The one most immediately pertinent here to listeners and our conversation today is sort of as the inaugural executive director of the Bitcoin Coalition of Canada, which is an incorporated not-for-profit organization that has the goal of advancing education and adoption of Bitcoin, focus on grassroots adoption, but also to provide content for journalists and policymakers at all levels. I spend a bit of my time doing that. Another bit of my time is on the global level as a coordinator of a sort of upstart global organization called the Federation of Bitcoin Circular Economies. And the goal of that organization is really to connect and support local community projects around the world that are, embedding Bitcoin within the community as a tool for community development, peer-to-peer exchange, and really, doing all those things for the community that traditional financial systems and governments and global donor agencies have not been able to do. So those are the two roles, and I know we'll talk about both of them. In terms of my background, so I spent about 20 years in global health and development. My education's in political science, international relations. Spent about 20 years, a couple of those with a large global NGO, which was a really informative experience in terms of the good, bad, and ugly of UN agencies and big multilateral million and billion dollar projects to save the world. And then about the lion's share of my time in health and community development was more on the ground with community health centers. So working with local community-based organizations across Canada and around the world, that I still believe really strongly, are local agencies that are trying to, cut through all of the silos in, government and public programs that are trying to provide remedial services to people, to kind of bring those into single local hubs, where you can actually get to the root of people's health and social distress and provide services in an efficient, cost-effective way. So I ran two associations, the Canadian Association of Community Health Centers, and then our international federation, connecting those community health centers, to try to provide, effective community-based health and social services, and happy to talk more about those. About a year and a half ago, as part of my, and I actually wouldn't mind talking about my Bitcoin journey, my orange pill journey, because I think it's it touches on or gets at, some of the messaging I'd like to get across to, Bitcoiners about reaching out to people that, are pre-coiners or no coiners. But about 18 months ago, when it really, sorry, let me back up. About 2.5 years ago, I would say, is when, it really, the light bulb went off that Bitcoin is more than, just a savings technology, that it's actually a tool to what I, believe is accomplish a lot of the things that I've been trying to do through community health and development services. Um, and we talk about, working upstream, to try to tackle sort of what we call social determinants of health.
Love that term.
What I realized as I, started to learn about money and our broken money and the problems that Bitcoin helped solve was that, for 20 years, while I thought I'd been working upstream, it was still downstream. Right. And so made the decision about 18 months ago that I needed to, move laterally from that work that I was doing in community health and development to get at, that upstream problem of the broken money and try to figure out how I, can contribute to, advancing Bitcoin adoption, because ultimately I think it's, where we're going to be able to solve a lot of the problems that we dedicate our public and charity dollars to, right? Like, if we move further upstream to try to fix the money, we're going to, be able to disintermediate a lot of the, the structures that contributes to those downstream problems of inadequate housing, homelessness, social isolation, food insecurity, et cetera, et cetera. So there we are. I made that move laterally, and I've been trying to make contributions to the Bitcoin world, in large measure because I see them as a continuation of the work that I used to do in community health and services. It's just that, as I tell my colleagues, I packed up my tent and I've moved further upstream.
I like that explanation. I didn't know you worked in community health. I probably should have known that, but I'll note that I've been on the board of directors for an agency here in Hamilton, Wayside House, for
Yeah.
I don't know 11 or 12 years,
Yeah.
and I've seen some of the struggles with not only the the sort of side effects, I would argue, of some of the broken money issues we have, stuff like addiction, isolation, things of this nature, but man, the idea that people are waiting for the province or the Fed to come down from the heavens and save them with some catch-all program that's going to help with addiction, going to help with these, like you said, improving the social determinants of health.
Yeah.
It's just not the case. Not because there's not good people working at those levels, there are, but they're really bogged down in a way that community providers are not, in bureaucracy and funding and all these different red tape and cutting ribbons and all sorts of things like that. So I do want to talk a bit about that. It's a good idea. Maybe we should start there. Where are you finding the most success in your current endeavors at these sorts of, let's say, 3 levels, right? I mean, when it comes to the Bitcoin Coalition, especially, you're talking to federal government. You guys just released a paper, I think about a month and a half ago, sort of your recommendations as far as Bitcoin for the Fed. And then when it comes to the province and the community levels, maybe as well with the coalition, but then with the circular economies. I mean, where are you seeing the most success and sort of the most difficulty? Because as I said in the intro, and I told you this when we met, one of the reasons I was critical in the past is because it seems to me like there's not a willingness for governments to engage on equal footing with Bitcoiners, and specifically people who, I think by their own admission, I want Bitcoin to succeed because I think it's a good tool, but also because I have a bag, and I think governments view this as sort of a jive that, or a dog that doesn't hunt, right? And I'd be curious, when you talk to governments, do you see that resistance? Where do you see the resistance? Where do you see the opportunities for both of these things that you're interested in now?
Yeah. So, to be frank, we haven't had conversations with government yet, to be honest. So the Bitcoin Coalition is still embryonic. We had about a year worth of back and forth among a lot of Canadian Bitcoiners dating back about 2 years ago. But the need for something like a Bitcoin Coalition of Canada, we saw the work that was being done in the US by Bitcoin Policy Institute and some other upstart organizations in other places, the Bitcoin Bitcoin Policy UK, which has now been established, and some other.
Even Bitcoin Magazine in the States, right, is doing a lot of this sort of
Yeah,
entities work.
yeah, and Dennis Porter's work with
Yeah.
Satoshi Action Fund and whatnot, and so lots of conversations about getting this going, and it took about a year to finally, and to his credit, really, Brad Mills, just sort of saying like, let's just get off the proverbial pot.
Brad Mills is the meme of the man lying next to bed and his wife, right? And his wife, what's he thinking about? It's not. I tell you, I guarantee it's never other women. It's always something else. I guarantee it's something else.
Yeah, but Brad's a good dude. Brad's a really good dude. And so he brought me in saying, like, look, you've worked with not-for-profit organizations before, sort of the mechanics of this. Would you be involved? I'll help support it to get going. And so we spent a little bit of time to sort of bore everyone with sort of the mechanics of it. But it's just important to know for, in terms of people setting expectations and hopefully for us to begin to build buy-in. That there is a grand vision, but it takes time to bootstrap something. So we spent a little bit of time about a year and a half ago getting the bylaws written for this organization, incorporating just all that kind of stuff you need to do to have a real organization, and had that all effective as of January 3rd, 2024. So we had an actual organization as of Jan 3rd, 2024. And from that point, with no funding, it's a question of like, okay, how do we walk this forward? And so began with, trying to assemble people to get involved, to dedicate some time to, help provide some ideas for the work of the organization and so forth. And I believed firmly that in order to actually, all good?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you maybe had an audio issue or something. In order for us to be ultimately effective, at doing advocacy, you need an army on the ground, right? You need to get coordinated. You need to get organized because, even the best policy papers, positions, and sitting, across from party leaders in Ottawa where they're built won't amount to anything if if it's not backed up on the ground.
Right.
If they're not hearing messages from their fellow MPs at the constituency level, and if it's not made abundantly clear to them that there's a consequence to ignoring messages that you're bringing forth. And so we started with trying to just kind of bring some coherence to the sort of tapestry of Bitcoin education efforts that are happening, local meetups, et cetera, to start with building that grassroots movement, bring a little bit of coordination to it. And at the same time, trying to continue to put up the scaffolding for this organization, which has been incredibly challenging. So a good part of last year was spent, working with a committee that we've pulled together of local Bitcoin meetup leaders, people doing educational initiatives, et cetera, to talk strategy, to connect them, to build a bit of an actual coalition on the ground. I think we've had some success with that, connecting people across the country. It might not be evident, to the average Bitcoiner, but there is some of that work that went on, or that has been going on, to connect people and help local meetups support each other, strategize about how to increase their numbers and so forth. The other part, very frustrating part, has been, trying to get banked, which has been next to impossible.
Yeah.
We needed to get banked so that we could transact as an organization. We're 0 for 5 with banks.
It's unbelievable. That is just still unbelievable to me.
Yeah, absolutely. We have thankfully identified a bank based in Alberta, credit union,
Yeah.
that has been fantastic so far in terms of our engagement and is willing to bank us. The rub is that we need to reincorporate in Alberta. So when we hit that point, I put it on pause late last year because simultaneous to that, it was becoming clear that there was movement in the U.S. Around Bitcoin adoption, the idea of strategic reserves gaining traction around the world, and increasing indication that government was going to collapse in Canada. We'd be heading into a federal election, and we had to seize the moment.
Totally,
Uh,
man.
and so it's at that point that engaged with our the committee that we have of local educators um, meet up leads and some folks with a policy background to develop the policy paper that you saw,
I
which
put that link in the chat, by the way, for people who are listening, watching. I can see there's a bunch of you on Twitter. You won't see that. Go to YouTube and look at the link. It's on the BCC website as well.
great. Thanks for sharing that. Which was, us basically saying, it's time to actually just get some messaging out there, and have a platform on which to engage policymakers at different levels, starting with the federal level. We are the Bitcoin Coalition of Canada. So the primary, audience for messaging and policy engagement is at the federal level, but hopefully that'll, diffuse down to provincial and municipal levels. And we're trying to, share that messaging with them about the value of Bitcoin to the provinces and municipalities. And it may appear that not a lot has happened, but with a small organization that basically running on a zero budget at this point, we've done what we can to start to put some pieces in place, so that when it got time to have a policy paper out there and some actual asks for policymakers, that we'd have something of a network on the ground that we could tap into to then sort of activate. And so now that we've put out those federal recommendations, and have followed up with messaging to the executives of all of the federal political parties, well, I shouldn't say all of them. We haven't reached out to like the yogic flyers and those that are really on like on the peripheries. But to say that, we're here, these are our messages, and we're going to be engaging you not only at a central party level in the upcoming federal election, but that, we have a network on the ground that is going to be bringing questions to candidates on the ground. We want to, hear your positions on these. It's now time over the next couple of months to, get some tools out to Bitcoiners across Canada, so that folks on the ground in the Paz and Kelowna and Ottawa and Halifax and everywhere across the country can actually bring some questions to their candidates during the upcoming federal election, and hopefully cause a little bit of a buzz when it comes to Bitcoin. And yeah, let me pause there. Let me see if you have any questions about that.
Sure. So that was great. Scott, when I do the show, I encourage our guests to roll downhill, because I would rather sit here and just drink milk and let people actually hear from someone who's not me or Len during the show. That was great. So there's a lot of stuff to pull on there. Maybe let's go back a bit to the policy paper and the boots on the ground stuff. So that policy paper was released, I know, like I said, I think about a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, I think the policy paper is very good. I should say that. So kudos to you guys. And it's well put together. I think those recommendations, by the way, they're pretty easy. It's like, to me, and I think most Bitcoiners, seems like low hanging fruit, right? Like, you would obviously want to start a stash of Bitcoin. 100,000 is not that many. We have a commodity here that we could sell. We have actually a few commodities we could sell, but one key one, I would argue, obviously the oil and gas from Alberta. And, when I look at that policy paper, what I see are things that already seem to be not out of date, but like we could shoot higher than that because of what's going on in the United States. And so we have, I think, a lucky sort of cocktail here, where it's clear the Trump administration, as pro crypto as they may be, is pro Bitcoin as
Yeah.
well. Super. So we'll take that win, and seem to be willing to talk about not only using seized Bitcoin as a reserve asset for the US Treasury, but
Mhm.
also potentially buying Bitcoin down the road
Yeah.
or using Bitcoin the same way they use gold. These things have all been discussed. Guys like David Sachs, he's a very public guy. He's been doing a podcast for the better part of 5 years and has said a lot of things about Bitcoin on Twitter and on that podcast. And as I mentioned earlier, probably has a bag. And we also now have this, I think, spirit of competition, save for the other night, an embarrassing showing on the ice by the red and white against red, white, and blue. The spirit of competition with the United States now, where maybe there's a possibility we could unite a group of people that would otherwise not be super friendly to Bitcoin. I'm talking specifically about federal politicians, and say, look, the US is doing this. We need to not only do it better, but we have to do it first. And by the way,
Yeah.
there's a ton of Canadians here that have not only influence, but capital to help you do it and help you win if you run on this platform. That's not a question per se, but it's a little bit of a framing to what I want you to talk about next. The policy proposals. So for people who are looking at the document, on the second page, there's basically a summary of the four policy positions. One is implemented to minimum tax. There's the elimination of cap gains for Bitcoin held more than a year, provide incentive support and remove regulatory red tape to scale up mining. I love that. It's not talked about enough. And obviously establish an SPR for Canada. So let's go through them, maybe
Sure.
in a way that you think is best. We don't have to do it point by point, but give me the sort of framing on why you guys chose these, when you chose them, and whether or not you think these are too easy now, not easy enough now. Where do you find yourself now as someone looking at these policy positions, given what's happened in the States over the last 2-3 months?
Yeah. I mean, we crafted the recommendations sort of cognizant of what was brewing, in the US. This was, immediately after the recent election in the US that, we got going with the policy paper. It was clear that there was momentum. But coincidental to that, there's also momentum in other jurisdictions, right? There was already indication in the Czech Republic, for instance, that they were going to eliminate cap gains on Bitcoin held for 3 years or longer. There was, continued policy in Germany and other jurisdictions related to that. And I think it's sort of this, they were intended to capture the spirit of moving from Bitcoin as this, thing or tool in the shadows that individuals are sort of coyly holding on to and trying to do jurisdictional arbitrage to figure out how to fly under the radar and take advantage of their stacks, et cetera, to like walking out into the light to say like, no, this is a legitimate technology, a legitimate tool for savings, and as indicated right there in the white paper, money, right? And this has now received wide scale institutional endorsement and adoption. It's being recognized and used at a state level as money in multiple jurisdictions, et cetera. Like we should no longer be hiding away from that as Bitcoiners. We need to own that and walk into or lean into the challenge of getting policymakers in Canada to recognize that. And in terms of the recommendations, I want to make really clear that the order of those recommendations, I think, speaks to a priority as well.
Okay.
Right. While we felt that having a recommendation related to strategic Bitcoin reserve is important and timely, you'll note that it's the last of the recommendations. And I think, to speak to the probably zeitgeist among Bitcoiners, right, is really that there's a tension among Bitcoiners as to what we want in terms of the involvement of the state. Do we actually want the state to hold Bitcoin, or do we want to accelerate right? Disintermediate the state and either move to some future state of anarcho-capitalism or
Oh my God.
a basic state, and that's going to continue among Bitcoiners. Right? There's going to be a spectrum of people there, but fundamentally, I think what we can all agree on is that as Bitcoiners, what we want to do is make sure that to the extent possible, this is and remains as much as possible a grassroots movement, right? And so the focus is really on policy that will support and accelerate adoption and use of Bitcoin by individuals, families, small businesses, community groups, et cetera. So trying to reduce those barriers and make Canada a more hospitable jurisdiction, to be a Bitcoiner. And so, eliminating, not eliminating cap gains altogether, but having an initial de minimis exemption so that you're not, hit on spending Bitcoin to buy a cup of coffee or, a pair of hockey skates or something, I think will help to, advance that spirit of Bitcoin being a legitimate medium of exchange, something that I think, a large proportion of Bitcoiners be willing to, tap into.
Totally.
Even if, there are, those holdouts who say like, never spend your Bitcoin, right? I think that there are a lot who would if, and do the spend and replace bit if, the cap gains tax was not made an issue. And, that applies on the day-to-day spend aspect, which is why we, led off with the de minimis exemption of $10,000, and then the second being to have cap gains eliminated, period, on Bitcoin held for 3 years or longer. We could have outright asked just for the elimination of cap gains. I'm sure, those that are a bit more pragmatic among us would agree that would be a hard sell. But when you have other jurisdictions that have implemented something like a minimum hold period, to not incur cap gains, that we can demonstrate that there's precedent out there globally. Like the Canadian government is not going to, turn up its nose at Germany,
No.
for instance, right? And it also enables us to advance the case that, Bitcoin as a savings technology can help empower families, right? And encourage savings. So a complement to something like the TFSA, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so those two asks, I would say, really are the primary focus, because that's what will enable us to continue to make this more of a grassroots movement. And I think ultimately, there's a case to be made that it's probably better to have a distributed network of individuals, families, businesses across Canada that hold and use Bitcoin in terms of the stability and, development of our country, be it as it may, than it is to have, the government itself holding a stack. And so, I think while it's important to argue that, the government should hold reserves, if you're not going to hold gold, hold Bitcoin, and, put those towards elimination of debt, future investment in infrastructure, other, projects. But like first and foremost, we want to stress that, Bitcoin is a tool for the people, right? And that with those two primary recommendations, we can really contribute to rebuilding our country from the grassroots up.
Okay, so there's a lot there. The one thing, the one thing I like this idea of the de minimis tax is that it does force some increased, velocity of money among Bitcoiners. It's a real issue, right? And you guys, I'm sure, thought about this. You have a great group of people there. For people who are not, watching live, or even if you are, go to the website and look at who's involved in the BCC. The thing about the velocity of money in Bitcoin is that there's a huge swath of people. I would argue the people with the most Bitcoin, the people you really have to do the most convincing for a multitude of reasons. Chief among them, they actually have the Bitcoin that needs to be spent. These people don't want to spend it, and they don't want to spend it for a couple of reasons. One, because I think there's a case we made that if you're a really OG Bitcoiner, like pre 2015, let's say, there's a level of anonymity with those older stacks that is just not replicable today. And if you spend, you're cooked. That's number one, which is difficult. And so that's why, by the way, people listening, watching, it's so important that you have this de minimis tax exemption, because you don't want to have your stack exposed to a government that, is, I think you guys even mentioned this in the paper, growing their debt by $100 million a day or something insane, right? Or, 10 million a day, whatever it is. And, to have this government looking at your stack and thinking this is a tax receipt in waiting is not palatable for people who are invested in this stuff and have their whole net worth tied up in it. That's number one. Number two, the reason you need to convince these people is because these are people with the most influence. I look at the Bitcoiners that are prevalent on Twitter, on X, and it is guys like Mills, Pierre Rochard, Livera, these guys who are sort of at different places in terms of their views on spend and replace, on velocity of money, on whether this is savings technology or a means of exchange, things of this nature. And you have to get those guys, I think, aligned a little bit on whether or not this is something that people should be doing in terms of the spend. And without that de minimis tax exemption, it's very difficult. So I applaud you for that. The other thing I want to talk about a bit is this mining thing. So mining, we talk about mining on the show a lot.
Yeah.
Not for the reasons that you may think. When we talk about it, one of the things we say is we can't have corporate mining entities that are the size of Riot, Hut, Marathon for a bunch of reasons. The two big ones, obviously, are one, they're an attack vector for the network. The things that really make the network valuable in terms of the uncensorable or difficult to censor transaction nature.
Yeah.
And then also the thing that bothers me is that these guys are constantly forced sellers because they're operating in a world that rewards that behavior, and it's bad for the floor price. And that's me talking my book a little bit. I think you probably agree, but I'm curious, when you guys talk about the mining aspect, talk to me a bit about why that made it onto the list and what it means to actually have true proliferation of mining. That's not on the corporate side.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate your comments there. And, I would add that, fundamentally, and as I explained earlier, coming to Bitcoin, and making that lateral move from community health and development to Bitcoin was precisely because I saw the promise of Bitcoin as a tool for, building a better, fairer society, and that, I mean, you can drive a truck through that statement, right? Because by whose definition, what is a better society, et cetera. But I think, to use that adage of like the average person, I think the average person, feels that we would be better to have a society that is characterized by less disparity in wealth, reduced income and wealth gap. And that whether it's through charities, through state activities, et cetera, we should have some mechanisms to, help people who are just catching hell and who need some support to, live a life with dignity.
Totally.
Right. And so that's where I come from. I don't come to Bitcoin from the perspective of TradFi, number go up, et cetera. I really believe in this as a powerful tool for social good, and not just in Canada, globally. And so to pick up on that, the extent to which that idea of number go up dominates, to the, exclusion almost of other considerations. Bitcoin as money, as a tool for, to unify us, to build healthier societies. Yeah, of course, within a market-based system. I'm not talking about some communist redistributive, I just want to make clear vision, but like to actually, achieve some modicum of a liberal, you know, democracy where, we can lift all boats and based on sound money. I absolutely agree that like when it comes to mining, we need to distribute that. And I would love to see mining, take root in, First Nations communities in northern Quebec, northern Manitoba, and elsewhere, for instance, to actually, provide the opportunity for a true sovereignty and development in ways that our current top down federal
It's just it's so embarrassing.
neo-colonial
It's
structures
so
just
embarrassing.
are,
Yeah.
are never are never are never going to do. So yeah, absolutely, the same way that you have gridless and other groups, Marathon among them, right? A big one that's mining in Ethiopia and I think Finland and elsewhere, doing good work. Like I totally agree. We need to decentralize, distribute that, and I mean, talk about low hanging fruit. To borrow your term from earlier, I mean, our resource abundance, right? The amount of untapped natural resources, hydro in particular, that is just being squandered on a daily basis. If we could get some policymakers to Bhutan,
Yeah. Send them out there.
to actually learn something,
Yeah.
just imagine what we could be achieving. To tie in the other piece, I know you've been banging on the last couple of episodes, as I've heard them. The imminent impact of U.S. tariffs and a trade war with our partner. Like, come on,
Yeah.
we
She's a
have
bit of
these
agency,
low
right?
hanging fruit there.
We refuse to do it. And you're talking about it for the First Nations communities, for a country like Bhutan. Like these guys, they are in this boat where they realize the agency has been taken from them over the years. It's been completely eroded, right? Whether it's waiting for handouts from the federal government here, and I cannot imagine the the anger in a First Nations community where you don't have running water, but you get to see the prime minister talk about we're going to lower the flag for 6 months. Like that's not a win. That's not a win for anyone who cares about real life.
Yeah.
And when you talk about that community, you talk about Bhutan, talk about even El Salvador, Scott, like these countries looked at their chessboard and thought, I am against the wall here. I have to make a move to get agency back for my country, my people, and generations to come. How am I going to do it? They see Bitcoin. And when I ask myself, like, why doesn't Quebec think about the hydro? Why doesn't Alberta? Although to Alberta's credit, I think they are starting to think about this in a way that maybe they weren't before.
Yeah.
They're not seeing the big picture because they don't realize that their agency is being eroded. It's this boiling frog thing, right? You don't realize that you don't have any freedom of choice or freedom of outcome, freedom to influence your outcome past 10% or 15% until it's too late, until that freedom erodes to zero. And these countries have reached zero and they've decided to go a different route. In Canada, Quebec, and all these other places like that are wasting power, wasting, I think, like time. Honestly, these are my words, not yours. Like trying to do this dance, this bureaucratic dance about what can we do against Trump? What can we do against? Fuck all that. Like you have options that are in front of you that you refuse to embrace because, I mean, you just don't know, or you don't like the people who are posting about it online, or you don't like that the government next door who has opposing views to you is thinking about doing it. Like these are not good reasons. And one of the reasons I was critical of engaging with governments in the past is because I think about these types of people, and the first thing that comes to mind is this is an immovable object. This person's never going to come around because their way of life is too comfortable. They don't have the same problems that the rest of us are seeing, experiencing, in your case and a little bit in my case, spending time working on fixing. Mm-hmm. And unless you see that firsthand, the incentive to change just does not exist. And that's been frustrating for me. And I'm curious, like, when you think about what you've done so far with BCC and in the circular economy, when you come up against one of these, what I'm calling an immovable object, like how do you find the resolve to like hang in and say, like, this is a worthwhile cause, engaging with this person, engaging with this community, trying to find a solution that's not only going to work, but is also like agreeable, palatable for this person. What, like, how do you do it? It's it's admirable that you guys are doing this, but I just don't have the
Yeah.
the
Well, I mean,
the
I look
eye
at
for it.
myself personally, right? Like as sort of a case study here. I'm an accidental Bitcoiner, right? I'm a recovering lefty. And I say that facetiously, right? Because, I've now moved beyond like the left right um, you know, polar
Totally.
narrative, and for quite some time I started describing myself as politically homeless. I've shifted that to talking about being post partisan, right? Like I'm post partisan because um, we now occupy in liberal democracies these theaters where politics is sport, right? And all of the incentives conduce towards politics as sport, where an issue adopted by one team must, by virtue of being adopted by that team, be opposed by the other team, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's theater. It's theater, and it doesn't actually reflect what I believe are actually the genuine dispositions and values of the vast majority of people. Like I've become fond of saying that I really believe that if you can strip away all of that and you can strip away the coded language that we use that gets picked up and weaponized by political parties and those who attach to their political team. That just as much on the left as on the right.
for sure,
If
for
you can
sure.
strip away the coded language and whatnot, I honestly think that about 80% of people can agree on about 80% of things. But we don't start there. We start at the 20%, right? And automatically it becomes lightning rods, right? And we end up not being able to have constructive dialogue about material things that matter to the vast majority of people, and even if it means like temporarily suspending, or holding our nausea at the 20% of things that we might really disagree with, to say like, okay, let's start with where we can agree. Um, and as someone's really long-winded, but as someone who's like come into Bitcoin and has really been engaging in good faith, I think, with people across the political spectrum, and as that recovering lefty, with people who would be more to the political right, people I 6-7 years ago I would never be talking to,
Mhm.
and to actually engage with Bitcoin sort of as a common touch point, and to be able to like strip down conversations and to say like, okay, who are you? What do you value? Do you really believe that uh, that it, everything boils down to like pick yourself up by your bootstraps, and if you're poor you deserve it, etc. Like those caricatures that we would have of people on the political right coming from the left, they're just so false, right? And I would say it goes the other way, etc. So I use my own experiences, the way I'd entered into Bitcoin, and just the renewed optimism that it's given me about being able to actually connect across a political spectrum, and to be post partisan, to not get caught up in the theater of politics
Right.
as sort of my well, and that's what kind of renews me. And I always try to engage people now on like, okay, where can we agree, or like, or just that fundamental question, like what matters to you, and appreciating that across society, because of this polarization, because of this toxic like team sport type partisan politics, we're often just using different words, different language, to either like positively talk about things or pejoratively talk about things. And it's like just making a commitment to kind of strip that away. And the more I do that, the more I, come back to that conclusion that like 80% of us can agree on 80% of things. What that means in terms of like a practical program of action and like what do we do with that? I'm still chewing on, I'm still trying to figure it out, but it at least gives me the sense that, okay, you know what? There is there is um there is the basis for, you know, building a better society and working on that as a collective project. It means though that we've got to be able to get more people to actually be able to step back a little bit from the partisan politics, to get back to like, first principles conversations, to actually making commitments to have constructive dialogue as opposed to, just, throwing spears at each other. And to say like, okay, what can we agree on? And I think like Bitcoin is a unique, maybe not unique, incredibly powerful tool to do that, because there are reasons why it should appeal to individuals who want to focus more of their attention on market-based economics and finance and that sort of thing, and how it can create more fairness within that structure. And to the same extent, individuals like myself who might have cared first about like, how do we deal with homelessness and getting housing to people who need it, or how do we deal with the crisis of food insecurity? It should appeal, or human rights should appeal to them as well, right? Because it's the upstream cause of so many of those factors. So I just try to carry that knowledge and that consciousness with me into like all of my engagements, and to try to know my audience and to say like, okay, how do I help you get to that point where you can appreciate that Bitcoin is this tool that addresses some of the concerns that you have. And I think the more of us that do that and just try to engage from that perspective, and I know it's not easy, like you just want to resort to the like have fun staying poor, or the name calling. Like, I get it, but like that's just how I see my place in this. And it's from that place that I've been trying to help build the Bitcoin Coalition of Canada as well, right? To try to get as many people into the tent as possible who can communicate with different audiences, and to try to unify more Bitcoiners. So we'd be like, okay, we have some common challenges, and because we enter into this space with all of our preceding baggage, political affiliations or preferences, etc., we're going to be able to better communicate with particular parts of the normie world that that we need to reach. And it's just an optimism, a hope that we can do it, like one person at a time, one meetup at a time, etc. But hopefully, moving that forward gradually over time, to the extent that like we're kind of from the grassroots up, doing this societal renewal. And it's probably a project that like will last beyond your lifetime, my lifetime, and others, but like I think that's the mission that's in front of us.
So I will say that this passion you just heard is the reason why one of the big reasons why I wanted to have Scott on the show. I met Scott last year at the conference. The first time we met was after I had just taken a leak. I barely was out of the urinal, and we ran into each other in the hallway. And then the second time was at the sort of pint meetup the night after the conference was done. And both times you can hear that passion in Scott's voice. And that's an important thing in Bitcoin, because as you mentioned, this 80% thing is like the easiest thing in the world to say and understand, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. But talking to somebody about it is almost impossible. You see this all the time, by the way, whether it's like at the pub with your friends, whether it's playing pickup basketball, whether it's like, I just finished watching Love is Blind with my wife, and like these people agree on 80% of things and they want to talk about George Floyd instead. Why? Like you guys, you agree on so many things. You can work on that other 20%. That 80% is hard. It's hard to get to. which makes it so much more valuable. The unique thing is that it's there with everybody, pretty much. You're the same species at the end of the day. You rely on the same things. You want the same things. You have the same internals, and by nature, you're going to be aligned on quite a bit. So kudos to you again for sort of pinning that down. That's important, and Bitcoiners need to remember that. I've said many times that one of the things we need to do better as a community is stop telling people to have fun staying poor and stop refusing people who are coming here from different backgrounds. Because as the space grows, whether it's because numbers going up, whether it's because governments are cracking down, whether it's for whatever reason, you're going to get a lot of people with a lot of ideas, and a lot of them are going to be good. And if you refuse to accept these people as part of your tribe based on that 20%, you're going to be cooking yourself a little bit. You don't want to do that. These are good people with good ideas in a lot of cases, and we need those ideas as the community grows. Now, I want to finish with this.
Let me just add on to that. Like if because I suspect that a large proportion of the audience is probably not coming from a traditional kind of lefty NDP background.
Certainly not
in Canada. I am, right? And so if you've heard me speak here and feel that to some extent it makes sense, and that like, this isn't like some commie, redistributist, agenda that this dude is bringing here as someone who declares his, sort of traditional lefty background, then I hope that sits with you, because I think we need to like be able, and I'm not just directing this to folks who may be like center right. I have this conversation all the time now with friends and colleagues who come from that lefty background, in terms of engaging people on quote unquote the opposite side of the political spectrum with a spirit of generosity, right? But I would just say that it's important for us to unpack why it is that people arrive at certain perspectives about how to build that better society, and why it is people who are leaning left and who think that the answer to every societal issue is another regulation or another government intervention to solve that, right? Like there's for the exact same reasons as those of us who are Bitcoiners now, previously did not understand what money actually is, did not understand, the problems that we're now looking to address, that they actually existed. It's the same thing with those folks, right? And so the left is occupied by, there's more extreme cases of people who really have, more authoritarian, leftist authoritarian tendencies, and are gonna only see the 20% of issues that are divisive. But like the left is and people that I work with and friend group or whatnot, like, occupied by people who very genuinely are compassionate, who want to build better societies, and who very sincerely, genuinely believe that the way to achieve that is, through government intervention, because they don't understand I say the left has lost political economy, right? Like just this ability to understand the mechanics of how things function. The time is spent always on the spending side of the ledger, right? And never on the income side of the ledger. And so my challenge, to friends on the left is you really want to make a difference in the world, learn about the bond market, right? Learn about the mechanics of finance and global trade, et cetera. Begin to appreciate, how decisions are arrived at, at these macro levels that affect the fundamental operation of the country, province, city in which you live. Because to just talk about clawing back from the rich and making corporations pay their fair share, etc., to which there's some small, I would open it up that say like there's some truth to that, right? To some extent, and say that like people should pay their fair share. Yeah, I know. I just lost them, right? uh, uh, you know, that fundamentally just folks don't have the fundamental education to appreciate the the bankruptcy of a lot of the solutions. That doesn't mean that they're not genuinely concerned with building a better society,
Yes.
and they're homeowners, and they're like everyone else trying to
They're on the street
figure
with you
out.
and me. They're at the grocery store. They're at the gym. They're at the church. Like they're everywhere you and me are. They're living
And
the
they're trying to
same life.
and they're living this confused world where they realize that like their purchasing power is being deleted, and there's this thing inflation, and you know they're trying to figure out, what do I invest in so that I can, you know, leave a legacy for my family, et cetera. And it's just, you know, and I say that the same thing to you know, to you know, my friends and colleagues on the left, is like, stop, you know, stop, you know, painting this caricature of people, you know, who vote conservative, who, you know, occupy the center right, are, you know, exclusively hyper individualistic, don't care about the community in which they live, you know, wish only to live in gated communities, et cetera, et cetera. It's just not true, right? Um, yeah, and so I think we've just like got to figure out, you know, at a societal level, like, how do we extend a bit more of a spirit of generosity to people, and like appreciate that, whether it, you know, put your tinfoil hat on and say it's Chinese and Russian agents that, you know, have implemented this grand plan to weaken us from within, you know, or if it's just, you know, the you know, consequence of fourth turning, or whatever. We're at this point now where we're just at war with each other, and weaponizing language, and, you know, not being able to like to be constructive with each other. We got to figure out how to walk back from that.
I totally agree. I do. And, you know, I said this, Scott, beforehand, that most of the time in the interviews, people start to drop off at like 50 minutes, but the numbers are still going up here. I can see there's a few hundred of you guys here. So maybe we'll do one more question. And we could tie a bow on that whole spirit of generosity thing at the end here. You have your work cut out for you, Scott, when it comes to bringing people together from across these different, you know, spectrums of living and spectrums of ideologies and things of this nature. You have your work cut out for you, engaging with some of the, you know, for good reason in some cases, the most calcified, ossified institutions and agencies and things of this nature in Canada, at the federal level. And, you know, in terms of your work within the circular economy community as well, you know, trying to convince people that are living in some cases check to check, meal to meal, that you should take Bitcoin for some of your services instead of Canadian dollars or, you know, barter or whatever they're doing now. So I want to know what's next for you. And maybe at the end of that, how can people help you? I mean, if people are listening and want to help, how can they do that?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So, um, the next thing is to like continue to, you know, move forward the sort of three legs to the bar stool that I described earlier, that we you know, begun to put in motion um, last year, 2024, which were like to build the structure of the organization. So, you know, we have the capacity to, you know, take donations, function as an organization, and grow, so that we can actually, you know, get to Ottawa and spend time sitting in front of MPs, and, you know, have a little bit of resources to work with. The second is to continue to move forward the kind of movement building at a grassroots level.
Mm.
So leaning into the group that we've already brought together, in terms of education, local meetups, et cetera, and hopefully trying to help them help new groups to get established. You know, it'd be great to see a Bitcoin meetup in twice as many communities in 2025 as there were in 2024, and that's happening. And I think we can claim a little bit of credit for that, for like increasing visibility of local meetups, helping, you know, connect people to, you know, like someone like Corey in Ottawa is connected with folks on the West Coast and elsewhere to provide insights.
People in this chat know Corey, but they don't know his name is Corey. So just
Oh,
be informed. I mean, they're not gonna be able to put it together, but just know
okay.
that Corey's a frequent viewer, listener of this show. Yeah.
All right. So I'm doxing people left and right, right? Sorry, comrade. Um, um, yeah, to provide some support. And I think sometimes that's all that's needed is like someone's like, I wish I had a local meetup. I wish there was somewhere, I could get people to help, share my knowledge about Bitcoin and help move forward the ecosystem. And it takes as little as like, giving them a little bit of a connection or resource. So just trying to do that sort of thing with a light touch, and to the extent possible, just trying to add some connective tissue to all the things that are already happening to hopefully have that generate more grassroots education activity, et cetera. And then the third is like really moving forward into engaging policymakers. So the policy paper, our asks now provide us the platform to do that. I think that's solid 4 asks, which we'll want to tailor with all of the political parties. Obviously, the Conservative Party of Canada is going to have different primary interests than the NDP and the Green Party, for instance. But I think there's a case to be made with all of them that Bitcoin is something they should be paying attention to and should be supporting as a tool for society building, as well as then, getting it down to the provincial and municipal levels. And, we have the example of Vancouver now, which had already been, already amazing stuff happening in Vancouver, thanks to, the work that folks on the ground are doing, and Koinos and, others to build a circular economy there. But now with the mayor,
Ken was on the show about a month ago.
Yeah, and I just had a little bit of time with him in El Salvador a couple weeks ago, and we had brief conversations, but like he's the real deal. Like he's a Bitcoiner, and his message, I'm sure he would be fine with me saying this, is like, use me, right? Like I believe in this. I believe I'm being authentic. I really believe that this is a tool to improve the well-being of our city and the residents of our city. And I'm happy to communicate that message to other mayors, et cetera. And so, plan to take him up on that. So, obviously that's a lot of work. We've got to coordinate it. And I hate being, the one to go hat in hand to people, but, it does take resources to get this done. I think we're doing a fair amount already with very minimal resources, almost to zero budget. We have a few recurring donations and support from a few very kind people. But if people want to donate to us, if you go to our website, there's a link to our Geyser page. You can donate sats via Geyser to us. If you want to make a contribution via another method, if you wanted to do it in a more discreet way, whether Bitcoin or fiat, we could find a way to make that happen. Hopefully over the coming few months, we'll get, our banking established and have some alternate ways to accept Bitcoin other than Geyser, but that would be incredibly helpful. Volunteering, we do have a vision of engaging people to be able to, have people volunteer time. And we have had some expressions of interest in volunteering time. How can I help? How can I get involved? It's incredibly, appreciated. It's just like, what do we do with it? But I have a bit more capacity to be able to make good on that. I would say the one, thing in short order that we'll have for people to kind of do is to take our recommendations and go hand them off to your current MP, to your MPP or MLA or city councilor. Even if it's, with little other than that, just saying like, please, I'd like you to take a look at this. This is important to me. I think this is important to, to our constituency. And then during that coming federal election, we're putting together a package that people can use, some pre-scripted questions that can be asked at all candidates meetings, a letter that can be written to sort of template letter that can be sent to candidates, et cetera. So to get involved and engage. And I would, appeal to folks, even if it's just out of enlightened self-interest, right? Like I want to, as a Bitcoiner, I want to feel like I should engage candidates and elected officials because I just want them to leave me alone. And this is the route to getting them to leave me alone. You got to engage because, as the saying goes, you may not care about politics, but politics cares about
Oh
you,
yeah.
right? So like those are a few ways. If you're willing to, donate, we'd be, incredibly appreciative of it. If it's not evident how you can do that, please get in touch with me directly and we can try to figure something out. And then otherwise, as we move into the federal election, and aside from the federal election, get our policy paper, into the hands of your local officials, send them an email, print it and drop it off at their office, et cetera. Even if it's just, I'd really like you to lay some eyes on this, because that'll have a lot more impact than, our email blasts and sending things to Ottawa offices and whatnot.
I think you're right. Maybe before we go, I'll note to you as a sort of beacon of your work. Not long after you released your paper, I got an email from somebody who is doing a similar proposal for a city in Ontario.
Oh, awesome.
And asked me to have a look at it. Maybe I'll see if he's willing to let you guys have a look at it too. I think it'd be good. That's a good connection that I didn't make in my head until just now.
No,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And I we didn't touch on this, and maybe we can do it another time if you're interested in having me back. Talk about the Bitcoin circular economies piece. So one of the sort of sub projects of that work has been to set up to start sort of a small working group for municipalities in North America that are looking to establish circular economies.
Outstanding.
The realities of doing that in Vancouver or Tampa Bay are, much different than Nairobi or or Bali or wherever it may be. So it'd be great for that individual to connect into this because, even though like our primary interface, is going to continue to be at the federal level, I'm increasingly won over to the idea that if we want to, to foster real change, our greatest chance for it's probably going to be at the local level, at the municipal level.
I totally agree, Scott. Yep. Yeah. It's almost a no-brainer. And like, again, the thing that I would tell people is, you have been in almost every case, okay, the outspoken person in your friend group. When we look at the camera, you've been the outspoken person in your friend group for a decade, probably at this point. I know for Len and I, we're like in our 8th year, 9th year, whatever it is. And I spent a lot of time trying to convince people this thing was a good idea. And now it's hard for me to understand how Bitcoiners are gun shy talking to their MPs, to local businesses, to their government representatives, and trying to make the same case. The stakes are higher now than they were 8 years ago. The veil and cloud of legislative uncertainty has largely been lifted. There's a global competitive landscape, easy to see, taking shape now. Not just on the horizon in the distance, it's almost right in front of you. These are important times, important conversations, and guys like Scott and the BCC are putting together documents for you. They're really doing the hard work for you in terms of starting the conversation. Like you said, building the platform, you take it the rest of the way. They're putting you on first base. Now it's your job to take it to second and third and eventually, get home with it. So
yeah, and I think probably less is more. Don't need to like get tripped up with the idea that I've got to orange pill my MP or my MLA like this, and I've got to have the perfect elevator.
Just start.
Just start, and that's probably better. Like I think we know with friends and ourselves, it takes multiple touch points, right? So I think even just getting this information into their hands and saying, look, I think this is really important. I think that this is something, you and your staff should be taking a look at. I think this has, a big opportunity to help us build a better community, a better country and endpoint.
Yeah. There's nothing to it but to do it, as the saying goes. You've been a great guest, Scott. You're more than welcome to come back, of course.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks everyone for listening, watching, and look for this on audio if you're on video on, I don't know, Thursday, sometime tomorrow. Until then, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, Ray. Bye, everyone.